I decided to pay a surprise visit to our beach house, but the moment I reached the gate, a new caretaker stepped in front of it, blocked my way, and actually laughed when I introduced myself. "Ma'am, stop lying," he said. "The boss's wife is inside with him right now." He pointed toward the garden, and when I followed his finger, I finally saw what he meant. That's when I smiled, adjusted my sunglasses, and chose to play along. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far it's reached." I'd been looking forward to this surprise trip for weeks. After 38 years of marriage, Spencer and I had settled into something steady and familiar. Comfortable routines, shared habits, the kind of partnership that had survived real storms. But lately he felt different, distant, guarded. Always checking his phone, taking calls in another room, claiming work emergencies that somehow kept happening more and more. At 64, I wasn't naive about long marriages. I'd watched friends go through betrayal, denial, humiliation, then reinvention. And I'd always believed I knew Spencer better than anyone. We built our life piece by piece. We created something solid. Still, over the last few months, an uneasiness had taken root in my gut. A quiet whisper I kept trying to smother with logic and loyalty. So when Spencer announced yet another last-minute business trip to Seattle, something inside me snapped. Instead of my usual patient nod, I got in my car and drove to our beach house in Carmel. Maybe I needed solitude. Maybe I needed the ocean to clear my head. Or maybe, if I'm being honest, some part of me already suspected what I would find. The 3-hour drive from San Francisco gave me too much time to think. The coastline rolled out beside me, beautiful enough to make you forget your own life for a moment. I remembered when we bought that house 15 years ago, back when Spencer's architecture firm was booming and my interior design business was finally taking off. That place had been our refuge, our private escape from the city and all its noise. The house sat on a bluff above the Pacific, modern, sprawling, and unmistakably Spencer. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, a deck that looked like it hovered over the waves. And inside, that was me. Every chair, every fabric, every color choice, every detail that turned cold architecture into a home. It was ours in a way our city house never fully felt, because that one came from his family, this one came from us. So when I turned onto the private road leading to the property, I felt that familiar wave of peace. Golden afternoon light, ocean wind, the distant crash of waves below the cliff. For a split second, I almost believed everything would be fine. Then I reached the gate. A young man I'd never seen before stood there, arms crossed, blocking the entrance like he owned the place. He looked early 30s, deep tan, strong build, the kind of confident posture that said he didn't just work here, he belonged here. I rolled down my window, assuming Spencer had hired new help and simply forgotten to mention it. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to get through. This is my house." He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh, like I'd just delivered a punchline. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. This is private property." "Yes," I said, still calm, even as irritation started climbing my throat. "I know. It's my private property. I'm Lorene Hartwell. This is my beach house." His laughter got louder. He slapped his thigh like I was part of a comedy routine. "Ma'am, please stop lying. The boss's wife is already inside with him right now." Then he nodded toward the house, amused and smug. "Nice try. You're not the first person to pull this trick." My heart didn't race. It stopped. The boss's wife. Inside? With him. Spencer was inside with his wife, but I was his wife. I followed his gesture, and through the massive living room windows, I saw her. A woman with long auburn hair moved through my kitchen like it was hers, confident, familiar, younger than me, maybe in her 40s, wearing a flowing white sundress that looked effortless and expensive. From that distance, I could still tell she knew where everything was. She opened cabinets I had organized, touched things that belonged to me, walked through my space without a trace of hesitation. And then Spencer stepped into view beside her. His arm slid around her waist with an ease that punched the air out of my lungs. Not a friend, not a client. That was intimacy. That was ownership. That was a man who wasn't worried about being seen. And there I sat, outside my own gate, being treated like an intruder. The young man, still enjoying himself, kept talking as if he was doing me a favor. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but Mr. Hartwell and his wife Emily are having a private weekend. They specifically said they didn't want to be disturbed." Emily. Even the name sounded younger than me. Fresher. Like something he said with certainty, like it had always been true. Something changed inside my chest right then. Shock, hurt, humiliation, and then click. All of it hardened into something sharper. I looked at this man who was so sure he knew who belonged in my house, so sure I was the liar, so entertained by my desperation, and I made a decision. "Oh my goodness," I said, letting my voice tremble with fake embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right." I started digging through my purse, not because I needed anything, because I needed a moment. "I'm actually looking for work," I added softly. "I heard Mrs. Hartwell might need help with the house, and I guess I got confused about which property was which." His entire expression shifted. The mockery drained out of him and turned into something almost sympathetic. "Oh, well, that's different." He straightened up like he was suddenly taking me seriously. "I'm Darius," he said, "the new caretaker." He extended his hand through my window. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Housekeeping," I said smoothly. "Cooking. General help. I have excellent references. I've worked for wealthy families around here for years." Darius nodded, thinking. "You know what?" he said. "They might actually need someone. Mrs. Hartwell was just saying how much work it is to maintain a place this big." He glanced back toward the house. "Why don't you come back tomorrow morning? I'll mention it to them tonight." "That would be wonderful," I said, already mapping out my return in my head. "What time would be best?" "Come around 9. They usually have breakfast out on the deck, and Mrs. Hartwell likes to plan her day early." Mrs. Hartwell, this woman was living my life, sleeping in my bed, drinking coffee on my deck, and everyone around her was calling her by my name. I thanked Darius and drove off, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I barely made it a mile down the coastal highway before I had to pull over. The truth of what I'd just seen hit me like a punch to the chest. I clung to the wheel and sobbed. Spencer wasn't just cheating, he was living a whole separate life, one in which I simply didn't exist. Emily wasn't just some fling visiting our beach house. She was occupying it, claiming it, being treated as though she belonged there more than I did. But as the tears slowed and the sun sank toward the horizon over the Pacific, another realization took shape. I had been handed an opportunity. The next day, I would walk into my own house as a stranger. I would see exactly what my husband's real life looked like when he believed I was nowhere near it. And then I would decide what to do. The drive back to the city blurred into pure strategy. I would need to look different the next morning, more modest, less noticeable. I'd need a believable story, fake references, a background that could withstand casual questions. Most of all, I would need to steel myself for whatever I might uncover, because something told me what I'd witnessed so far was only the surface. I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily moving through my kitchen, Spencer's arm curled around her waist, Darius laughing at me like I was some crazy imposter. By 5 a.m., I gave up on trying to rest and started preparing for what might very well be the most important performance of my life. I'd spent hours the night before putting together my disguise. Nothing theatrical. I wasn't trying to fool Spencer, only the life he'd built without me. I pulled my shoulder-length silver hair into a plain bun, chose my most conservative outfit, and slipped on the kind of practical shoes I hadn't worn in years. In the mirror, I no longer looked like the woman who owned a beach house. I looked like someone who desperately needed the job that came with cleaning it. The drive back to Carmel felt unreal. I was returning to my home as a job applicant. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. Darius was waiting by the gate when I pulled up at exactly 9. He waved warmly and walked me up to the front door, the same door I'd crossed hundreds of times with grocery bags, weekend luggage, or flowers from our garden in the city. "Mrs. Hartwell is having her coffee on the deck," Darius said as we stepped inside. "She's really excited to meet you. I told her you have great experience with families like theirs." Families like theirs? In my own house. The interior looked different, though nothing drastic had changed. It was the small things: throw pillows arranged differently on the sofa I'd picked out, books I didn't recognize stacked on the coffee table, a vase filled with lilies where I had always kept roses. But it went deeper than decor. The very air felt altered, as if the house had started to forget who it truly belonged to. Darius led me through the living room and toward the deck, and when we reached the sliding glass doors, I saw them clearly for the first time. Spencer sat at our outdoor dining table, studying what looked like architectural plans. He wore the navy polo shirt I'd given him for his birthday last year, and his gray hair was rumpled in that familiar way that said he'd only recently gotten out of bed. He looked peaceful, comfortable, completely at home. Beside him sat Emily. Up close, she was even more striking. Early 40s, I guessed, with that kind of natural beauty that didn't need much makeup or fuss. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and she moved with the unself-conscious ease of someone certain she belonged exactly where she was. She was wearing one of my silk robes. The sight of it winded me. Spencer had bought that robe for me in Italy 3 years earlier, an anniversary gift I had cherished. I wore it on special mornings, slow Sunday breakfasts, quiet evenings when we wanted a touch of elegance just for ourselves. Now it hung from her shoulders, as if it had always been hers. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Darius called, stepping out onto the deck. "This is the woman I mentioned. She's looking for housekeeping work." Emily looked up, her face breaking into an open, radiant smile that seemed genuinely kind. "That's wonderful," she said. "Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee?" So I sat at my own patio table, facing my own ocean view, being offered coffee by a woman wearing my robe in my house. "That would be lovely, thank you," I replied. Spencer glanced up briefly from his plans, gave me the polite nod you'd give to a service worker, and went right back to what he was doing. No flicker of recognition, no double take, nothing. To him, I was completely invisible. "I'm Emily," she said, pouring coffee from the handmade pottery pot I'd bought years ago in Mendocino. "And this is my husband, Spencer." Her voice had a faint southern lilt that made her words sound soft and musical. "Darius says you have experience with houses like this one." "My husband." She said it so casually, so naturally, that for a split second I almost corrected her, almost said, "No, he's my husband." Instead, I slipped back into my role. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I've been working for families in Carmel and Monterey for about 20 years. The lie rolled out smoothly now. "I specialize in caring for luxury properties, especially ones near the ocean. Salt air can be really hard on furnishings and fixtures." I knew that from experience. I'd spent 15 years learning how to protect this house from the elements. Emily nodded eagerly. "That's exactly what we need. This place requires so much upkeep, and I want everything to be perfect." She gestured around the deck with pride. "Spencer designed it himself, you know. He's an architect." "I know," I wanted to say. I was there for every late-night sketch, every revision, every moment of him obsessing over the angle of the light. "It's beautiful," I said instead. "He has excellent taste." Spencer finally glanced up at that, focusing on me for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "It's taken years to get it exactly how we want it." Then he looked at Emily with open affection. "My wife has been a huge part of making it feel like home." "My wife." Each time he said it, the words felt like knives. Emily glowed at the compliment, then turned her smile back to me. "We're here most weekends now," she said, "and I'm hoping we can spend even more time here soon. Spencer's business is doing so well, he might be able to work remotely more often." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. Spencer's business was doing well because I had helped build it, because I'd spent years managing the finances, the marketing, the logistics, while he focused entirely on design. Now this woman talked about his success like she had personally laid every brick of it. "And what exactly would you need me to do?" I asked, keeping my tone professional. "Oh, everything really," Emily replied with a light, airy laugh. "Cleaning, laundry, meal prep when we're here, some grocery shopping, organizing, just keeping the whole place in good shape." She paused as if thinking of something else. "Would you be able to live in when we're here? There's a small apartment above the garage we could offer you." Live in. She wanted me to move into my own property as her staff. "I could arrange that," I heard myself say calmly. "Wonderful." Emily clapped her hands together like an excited child. "When could you start?" "Right away, if you need me." Spencer looked up again, and for a terrifying second I thought recognition had finally broken through. But his gaze slid over me with the same detached indifference he might show a lamp or a chair. "Sounds good," he said distractedly. "Darius can show you around, help you get settled." And just like that, I was officially hired to work in my own home for my husband and his mistress. The next hour felt like walking through a fever dream. Darius led me from room to room, describing the layout as if I'd never seen it before, explaining where things were, how the systems worked, what Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell preferred. "Mr. Hartwell likes his coffee strong," he said as we stood in my kitchen. "Mrs. Hartwell prefers tea in the afternoons. They usually have breakfast on the deck when the weather's good. She's trying to eat healthier. Lots of fresh fruit and vegetables." I nodded, pretending to take it all in, learning about my husband's habits like he was a stranger, because apparently to everyone here, I was. The guest apartment above the garage had once been Spencer's temporary office during construction, then a storage area for beach gear. Now it had been turned into a simple living space, a bed, a tiny kitchenette, a small bathroom with a shower. It was tidy, efficient, and utterly soulless. "Mrs. Hartwell had this set up last month," Darius explained. "She said they might want live-in help at some point." So this wasn't spontaneous. Emily hadn't just appeared, she'd been arranging a permanent role for herself, for her housekeeper in my home. "It's perfect," I told him, forcing a smile as I looked around the small room that would now be mine, while strangers occupied the life I had built below. As evening fell and I unpacked a few things into the guest apartment, I found myself standing at the window, looking down at the main house. Through the dining room windows, I could see Spencer and Emily sitting at the table where I had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and lazy Sunday mornings. They looked relaxed, at ease, like a couple who had spent years building a life together. I watched it all from above, like the ghost of my own life hovering at the edges. But as I got ready for bed in that unfamiliar space, something shifted. I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I was inside their world now, unseen but present. I would see everything, hear everything, learn exactly how my husband behaved when he thought his real wife was out of the picture. Tomorrow, I would start scrubbing my own floors for another woman. I would wash my husband's clothes so he could look sharp while taking his mistress out. I would cook in my kitchen for people who had stepped into my life like it was vacant. But I would also be gathering information, watching, listening, piecing everything together. And when I finally understood their entire carefully constructed lie, I would decide exactly how to tear it apart. I had been living in my own house as a stranger for 2 weeks when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. What I had assumed was just an affair, horrible enough on its own, turned out to be part of something much darker. By then, I'd settled into a routine that was both strangely soothing and excruciating. Every morning, I woke up in the cramped apartment above the garage and started my day serving the people who had replaced me. I made their coffee, cooked their meals, cleared their plates, cleaned up their mess, and listened as they casually discussed a future in which I didn't exist. Spencer had fully embraced the role of Emily's devoted husband. He brought her flowers, kissed her goodbye before leaving for his so-called business meetings, held her hand on their evening walks along the shore. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed they were just another happy couple in love. but I was starting to notice cracks. Emily took a lot of phone calls, always in private, slipping to the far end of the deck or retreating into the bedroom whenever her phone rang. Spencer spent long nights working on projects that had nothing to do with his architectural firm. And sometimes when they thought I was too far away to hear, their conversations grew tense, sharp, almost secretive, completely at odds with the affectionate image they showed the world. It was on a Thursday morning that everything finally unraveled. I was in the laundry room, folding the very clothes Spencer had worn to romantic dinners with his mistress, when raised voices drifted in from the master bedroom. The laundry room shared a wall with the suite, and the ocean breeze had pushed their window open just enough for their words to carry through. "You promised me it would be done by now," Emily snapped, her voice edged with anger. "I've been playing house for months, Spencer. Months." "These things take time," Spencer answered, but there was a tension in his tone I almost never heard. "We have to be careful. One mistake and everything collapses." "I'm tired of being careful," she shot back. "I'm tired of pretending to be the loving wife for your little show. When is she going to be completely out of the picture?" My hands froze on the shirt I was folding. They were talking about me. "Soon," Spencer said. "The paperwork is almost finished. Once it's filed, Lorene will be officially declared dead, and we can move forward with everything." The shirt slipped from my fingers. Declared dead. They weren't just trying to get rid of me through divorce or by quietly taking my assets. They were planning to erase me from the world entirely. "How much longer?" Emily demanded. "Because I'm getting really tired of this act. Living in her house, wearing her clothes, pretending I'm grateful for her furniture and her decor. It's creepy, Spencer." "Just a few more weeks," he said. "Once the life insurance pays out after the death certificate goes through, we can sell this place. Sell the city house. Cash out everything. We'll have more than enough to start over somewhere new." Life insurance. They had taken out a policy on my life and were planning to collect it. "And you're sure about the boat?" Emily asked. "No one's ever going to find it?" "The boat went down in international waters during that storm 3 months ago," Spencer replied, completely casual. "A tragic accident. Lorene was always a terrible sailor. She never should have gone out alone. By the time anyone realizes she's missing, there won't be anything left to find." I clutched the edge of the folding table to keep my knees from buckling. 3 months ago. That was the same weekend Spencer claimed he had a conference in Los Angeles. The same weekend I'd considered surprising him at the beach house, only to change my mind at the last minute because of a blinding headache. They had been planning my death for months. I was supposed to be gone already. "I still think we should have done it the clean way," Emily muttered. "Make it look like an accident right here at the house. All this elaborate boat and storm nonsense?" "This way is safer," Spencer cut in. "No investigation, no questions about who might have wanted to hurt her. Just a middle-aged woman who made a stupid choice to go sailing alone." "And if someone gets suspicious? Starts asking where she is?" Emily pressed. "Who's going to ask?" Spencer's voice turned cold and flat. "Lorene doesn't have close friends. Her sister's in Europe and they barely speak. Her business contacts will assume she's taking time to grieve after the tragedy. By the time anyone thinks to check on her, we'll be long gone." The worst part was that he was right. Over the past few years, I had let most of my friendships fade, pouring myself into our marriage and my work until my world shrank down to us and the business. Spencer had praised me for it, told me how much he admired my dedication, how focused I was on our life. Now I understood. He'd been isolating me on purpose. "What about the housekeeper?" Emily asked, and ice flooded my veins. "She's here every day. What if she starts asking questions?" "What questions could she possibly ask?" Spencer laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "She's domestic staff, Emily. She cooks, she cleans, and she minds her own business. Once we're gone, she'll just find another job. People like that don't involve themselves in their employers' personal lives. People like that. As if I were some lesser category of human being." "I suppose," Emily said slowly, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "I just don't like having her around. She's always watching, always listening. Sometimes I catch her looking at things like she recognizes them." "You're being paranoid," Spencer said. "She's probably just admiring the house. People like that dream of living in places like this. People like that." I had shared a bed with this man for 38 years, and this was how he talked about anyone he considered beneath him. "Maybe," Emily murmured, "but I'll be glad when we can get rid of her." "Soon," Spencer promised. "Once the insurance payout comes in and we're ready to leave, we'll give her some money and send her on her way. She'll never have any idea what really happened." Their voices faded as they moved away from the window, and I realized they were probably embracing, comforting each other after calmly discussing my death. I stood there in the laundry room, surrounded by the dirty clothes of their counterfeit life, trying to absorb what I'd just heard. This wasn't just infidelity, it wasn't just greed. They had plotted my death, planned to make it look like an accident, and intended to walk away with everything I had worked for. The only reason I was still breathing was because I'd had a headache 3 months ago. My hands shook so violently I could barely finish folding the laundry. I needed to get out of that house. I needed air, space, a plan. But as I gathered the clothes and started toward the door, Spencer's voice floated in again, closer to the open window. "Did you remember to call Marcus about the boat disposal?" he asked. "Already taken care of," Emily replied. "He'll have it completely dismantled by the end of the week. No trace it ever existed." Marcus. They had accomplices. This wasn't just Spencer and Emily. They had help, people who knew how to erase evidence. "And the records for her final sailing trip?" Spencer asked. "Perfect," Emily said. "Credit card charges for fuel, marina logs, even a witness who saw a woman matching Lorraine's description leaving the harbor alone that morning." They hadn't just tried to kill me. They had built an entire paper trail to prove it. Emily's voice carried a hint of pride. "If anyone ever looks into it, they'll find a clean trail leading straight to a tragic accident." They had built an entire fake timeline for my so-called final days. Somewhere, there were records showing I had rented a boat, bought fuel, and sailed out alone into dangerous waters during a storm. Someone had even been paid to lie about seeing me that day. "You really have thought of everything," Spencer said, clear admiration in his tone. "I learned from the best," Emily replied. Something in her voice made me freeze. "Rebecca was different," Spencer went on quietly. "That one was messier." Rebecca? Who was Rebecca? "At least with Rebecca, we didn't have to wait months for the insurance investigation," Emily said. "Car crashes are so much easier to stage." Car crashes. Insurance. They had done this before. "Rebecca was impatient," Spencer said. "She wanted to move too fast, take too many chances. You're smarter than that." My fingers dug into the doorframe as my knees went weak. Spencer wasn't just planning to kill me. He was a serial killer, a man who charmed women, married them, then murdered them for their money. And Emily wasn't his next victim. She was his partner. "How many others?" I whispered before I could stop myself, then went still, terrified they might have heard. But their voices drifted away, fading as they moved deeper into the bedroom. I forced myself to finish my chores on autopilot, my mind racing through the implications. Spencer wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a cold, calculating murderer who had likely been planning my death for years. And I was trapped in the same house with him, disguised as his servant, utterly vulnerable if he ever realized who I truly was. That evening, as I served them dinner on the deck, I watched them in the candlelight and finally saw them clearly. Spencer, the man I had loved and trusted for nearly 40 years, was a monster who saw me as nothing more than an asset to be cashed out, and Emily, with her warm smiles and gracious manners, was his eager accomplice. They chatted lightly about their weekend plans while I refilled their wine glasses and quietly mapped out how to stay alive long enough to expose them. Because now I knew the truth, and it was far worse than anything I had imagined. After uncovering their plan to murder me, I knew I had to move quickly. But I also understood I couldn't just run to the police with a wild story about overhearing my widowed husband plotting my death while I lived in his house under a false identity. It would sound unhinged. I needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence that no one could laugh off or explain away. The next morning, my investigation began in earnest. While Spencer was in the shower and Emily took her usual walk along the beach, I slipped into their bedroom and went straight for Spencer's briefcase. My hands shook as I sorted through architectural plans and business paperwork, searching for anything that connected him to insurance fraud or to the mysterious Rebecca they'd mentioned. What I found was worse than anything I'd pictured. Buried beneath legitimate contracts was a manila folder labeled Personal Insurance Matters. Inside were life insurance policies, not just mine, but 3 others. Rebecca Martinez, age 42, Diane Thornfield, age 51, Susan Walsh, age 48, 3 middle-aged women, each with sizable life insurance policies naming Spencer as the beneficiary. And tucked behind each policy was a death certificate. According to the dates, all 3 had died within the last 8 years. Rebecca Martinez, killed in a car crash in Oregon 5 years ago. Diane Thornfield, drowned in a sailing accident off Santa Barbara 3 years ago. Susan Walsh, died in a house fire in Colorado 2 years ago. All accidents, all involving wives of Spencer Hartwell, architectural consultant, all followed by large insurance payouts deposited into accounts in his name. My husband hadn't just planned to kill me, he had been murdering wives for profit for years. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. The policies, the death certificates, the bank records showing the insurance money being funneled into Spencer's accounts. Every scrap of proof that revealed his pattern. I was capturing a record of his entire career as a killer. I was snapping a picture of the last document when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Spencer. He was out of the shower earlier than usual. Heart pounding, I shoved the papers back into the folder, lined everything up exactly as I'd found it, and slipped out of the bedroom just as he stepped from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist. "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Hartwell," I said quickly, grabbing a spray bottle from my cleaning cart. "I was just about to dust the bedroom, but I can come back later." "No problem," he said, barely glancing at me. "Just give me 10 minutes to get dressed." I retreated to the hallway, sure he could hear my heart hammering from where he stood. I had what I needed, proof of his past crimes, but I also fully understood the danger I was in. If Spencer ever suspected what I had discovered, I wouldn't live long enough to use it. Over the next several days, I kept gathering evidence with the careful focus of someone whose survival depended on it. Because it did. In Emily's closet, hidden inside a shoebox behind her summer dresses, I found another folder. This one was full of what looked like detailed dossiers on Spencer's previous wives. Photographs, financial summaries, personal histories that must have taken months of tracking and research to assemble. Rebecca Martinez, I learned, had been a successful real estate agent with no close family and a sizable investment portfolio. Diane Thornfield had been a divorced financial advisor with a teenage daughter who lived with her ex-husband. Susan Walsh had been a widow with adult children scattered across the country. The pattern was unmistakable. Spencer chose middle-aged women with money but minimal close family, women whose absence wouldn't immediately trigger alarm, whose deaths wouldn't invite intense scrutiny. And at the very bottom of Emily's folder was a dossier on me. Seeing my entire existence reduced to bullet points on a target profile was both surreal and horrifying. Lorene Hartwell, age 64, interior designer, estimated net worth $1.2 million. No children. Sister resides in London. Limited social connections. Husband reports increased reclusiveness in recent years. Increasingly reclusive. Spencer had been engineering that for years, subtly nudging me to turn down invitations, to spend more time, just the two of us, to prioritize our marriage over maintaining friendships. I'd mistaken it for romance, for devotion. In reality, he had been isolating me so no one would notice when I disappeared, but the worst revelation came from Emily's own background. In documents buried among her personal papers, I discovered that her real name was Amanda Kellerman, and she had a criminal record stretching back 15 years. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. She wasn't simply Spencer's latest wife, she was a professional con artist, someone who specialized in insurance schemes. Together, they were predators, a practice team who had been systematically hunting wealthy women for years. I also stumbled on their immediate plans. Among Spencer's files was a detailed timeline outlining my death. According to their schedule, I should have died 3 months earlier in the sailing accident. My memorial service was already planned, set for next month to allow time for the insurance claim to finalize. What chilled me most, though, was their backup plan. If the boat scenario didn't work, they had several alternatives prepared: a fall on one of my favorite hiking trails, a staged home invasion at our city house, even a sudden medical emergency brought on by untraceable drugs. They weren't going to stop. If I didn't vanish soon, they would simply choose a different method. I photographed everything I could and uploaded the images to a secure cloud account I'd created under a false identity. But I knew documents alone might not be enough. I needed something current, something that showed them planning a murder in real time, a confession captured in their own words. That opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. On Friday night, Spencer got a phone call that visibly rattled him. I was serving dinner when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, answered, and I watched his entire demeanor shift, from calm and content to cold, laser-focused tension. "When?" he asked sharply. "How much does she know?" He listened for several minutes, his jaw clenching tighter with every word. Finally, he hung up and turned to Emily with a look I had never seen on his face before. Pure, calculating fury. "We have a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" Emily set her fork down, instantly alert. That was Marcus. Someone's been digging into Rebecca Martinez's death. Her daughter hired a private investigator. Rebecca's daughter, the teenager who'd been living with her father at the time, old enough now to look back and recognize how convenient her mother's death had been. "How much does this investigator know?" Emily asked. "Too much," Spencer replied. "He's linked Rebecca to Diane and has started asking questions about my connection to both." He raked a hand through his hair, thinking fast. "We have to move up our timeline." "How much?" Emily's voice was steady, but her shoulders had gone rigid. "We finish this weekend," Spencer said. "We can't wait for the official declaration anymore. We stage Lorene's accident now, tonight, and then we disappear." Tonight. They were planning to kill me tonight. I forced my hands to remain steady as I served their food, as though I hadn't just heard my death scheduled like a business appointment. All my careful preparation, all the evidence I'd gathered, none of it would matter if I didn't survive the night. "What about the housekeeper?" Emily flicked a glance in my direction. "We'll have to include her," Spencer said, completely matter of fact. "Make it look like they were both in the wrong place at the wrong time. Home invasion gone bad, maybe. Or a gas leak explosion. Include her. He was planning to kill me twice, once as Lorene Hartwell, his wife, and once as Margaret Chen, the housekeeper who had seen too much. I finished serving dinner and withdrew to the kitchen, my thoughts racing. I had hours, maybe less, before their plan went into motion. I needed proof of their immediate intentions, something concrete that showed they were about to commit murder. As they moved to the living room with their after-dinner drinks, I slipped my phone into recording mode and positioned myself where I could hear clearly without being seen. "So, what's the plan?" Emily asked. "How do we make sure both of them are taken care of?" "Gas leak," Spencer replied without hesitation. "I'll disconnect the line to the stove and let gas build up in the kitchen overnight. In the morning, when the housekeeper comes in to make coffee, any spark will trigger an explosion. Both bodies found together. Tragic accident. No survivors to contradict the story." "And where will we be?" Emily asked. "Already on the road to Mexico. I've got new identities prepared, cash in offshore accounts. By the time the fire department finishes their investigation, we'll be in a country with no extradition." "And the investigation into Rebecca?" she pressed. "Won't matter once we're gone," he said flatly. "Let them dig all they want. There won't be anyone left to prosecute." That was it. I had them. On my phone was a clear recording of Spencer and Emily calmly planning my murder and disguising it as an accident, but the clock was now ticking. Once they went to bed, Spencer would sneak into the kitchen, disconnect the gas line, and by morning, this house would be a smoking crater, with me inside it. I couldn't just run. If I suddenly disappeared, they'd know something had gone wrong and vanish before anyone could stop them. I couldn't call the police from inside the house. They'd hear me, and that would be the end of me. But I had one advantage they knew nothing about. I wasn't just Margaret Chen, the quiet housekeeper who had overheard too much. I was Lorraine Hartwell, the woman they believed was already dead. Unlike the other women Spencer had married and murdered, I knew exactly who he was and what he was planning. If I made it through the night, I would stop being prey and start hunting them. But first, I had to live long enough to do it. I had 6 hours until dawn. 6 hours before Spencer tampered with the gas line and turned my beautiful home into my grave. 6 hours to stage the most critical performance of my life. Back in the guest apartment over the garage, I spent the first hour uploading every piece of evidence I had to multiple cloud accounts and emailing copies to several backup addresses. If anything happened to me, there would still be a digital trail exposing Spencer and Emily for what they were. But I had no intention of dying that night. Instead, I decided to give them exactly what they wanted: my tragic accident, with a twist they'd never see coming. At 2 a.m, I slipped out of the apartment and headed toward the main house. Spencer and Emily were asleep in my bedroom, no doubt dreaming about the fresh start they'd enjoy once I was officially declared dead. The house was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the emergency lights in the hallways. I knew every inch of it, every board that creaked, every door that stuck, every corner where sound carried. I'd spent 15 years learning this house. Now, that knowledge was going to save me. My first stop was Spencer's home office, where he kept his backup files and important documents. I knew his filing system better than he did. I was the one who had created it. In the bottom drawer, behind old tax folders, I found what I was looking for: a thick envelope labeled Emergency Protocols. Inside were new identities for both Spencer and Emily: passports, birth certificates, social security cards. Spencer would become Robert Hamilton, architectural consultant. Emily would become Sarah Hamilton, his loving wife. There were even matching wedding bands inside, ready for their next act. More importantly, the envelope contained their escape plan: turn-by-turn directions to a private airstrip 40 miles inland, where a plane would be waiting at 6 a.m. to fly them to Mexico. From there, they'd travel on to Costa Rica, where Spencer already owned a villa under one of his aliases. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. But there was one scenario they had never accounted for: their victim fighting back. I photographed every page, then tucked everything back exactly as I'd found it. Next, I headed to the kitchen, the heart of Spencer's plan. Working by the dim glow of my phone's flashlight, I examined the gas hookups behind the stove. His idea was simple and effective: disconnect the line, let gas accumulate overnight, and wait for the first spark in the morning to trigger an explosion that would wipe out both bodies and all the evidence. I chose a different approach. Carefully, I loosened the connection just enough to create a slow leak, not enough to cause an explosion, but enough to trip the gas detection system I'd installed 2 years earlier after a neighbor's house had a leak. Spencer had complained about the cost back then, called it paranoid. Tonight, that paranoia was going to save our lives and destroy his. If the leak started building as planned, the detector would sound the alarm around 5 a.m. I would discover the problem and rush to wake Spencer and Emily, saving them from a deadly accident. I would be the rescuer, not the victim. But that was only the first move. Outside, I went to Spencer's car, parked in the circular driveway. Drawing on skills from a short, rebellious phase in my college years, I disabled the engine in a way that would look like a mechanical failure instead of sabotage. When he tried to drive to the airstrip, the car would refuse to start. By the time he realized what was wrong, it would be too late. Then I called the one person I trusted completely, Detective Sarah Morrison of the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. We'd met years ago during an investigation into a burglary at one of my design clients' homes. We'd stayed in touch, and I knew she'd pick up for me, even at 3 a.m. "Sarah," I whispered when she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "I need your help. I'm about to stop a murder." "Lorene? Jesus, what time is it? Are you okay?" "I'm okay for now, but I won't be for long." I took a breath. "I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say, no questions." I gave her the condensed version. My husband was planning to kill me for my life insurance. I had proof he'd done the same thing to other women, and he and his current wife were staging a gas leak explosion that morning. "Where are you?" Sarah asked, fully awake now. "At my beach house in Carmel, but you can't come in yet. I need to catch them in the act. Get them to confess while you're listening, otherwise they'll just claim I'm crazy and inventing stories about my husband." "Lorene, this is way too dangerous. If they're really planning to kill you..." "They think they already did," I cut in. "They don't know I'm alive. That's my advantage." I laid out my plan as quickly as I could. Sarah and her team would position themselves outside the property around 5:30 a.m., just before the gas alarm was set to go off. I would use my phone to record everything while she listened in through a three-way call. When Spencer and Emily spelled out their plan, or tried to stop me from saving them, Sarah would have the probable cause she needed to move in and arrest them. "This is insane," Sarah said, but I could hear her scribbling notes. "If you're right about the other murders..." "I am right," I cut in. "I have everything. The life insurance policies, the death certificates, their escape plan, but I need them to incriminate themselves while you're listening." There was a pause. "Okay," she said finally. "But Lorene, if anything goes wrong, if you feel like you're in immediate danger, you run. Don't try to be a hero." "Too late for that," I replied. "I've been a victim for 38 years without knowing it. That ends tonight." After I hung up with Sarah, I used the remaining hours before dawn to prepare for the confrontation that would either free me or finish me. I reviewed my evidence one last time. I rehearsed what I'd say to push Spencer and Emily into exposing themselves. I even wrote a final letter to my sister in London, just in case I didn't make it out alive. At 5 a.m., I was back in the guest apartment, fully dressed and ready. At 5:15, I called Sarah, put her on speaker, and muted my side of the call so she could hear everything that was about to unfold. At 5:27, the gas detector began its piercing scream. I waited exactly 3 minutes, long enough for Spencer and Emily to wake, panic, and stumble out of bed, before I burst through the front door of the main house, playing the role of a terrified employee responding to an emergency. "Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell!" I shouted, racing toward their bedroom. "There's a gas leak. We need to evacuate immediately." I met them in the hallway. Spencer was hastily pulling on his clothes. Emily stood frozen in her nightgown, her face bleached with what looked like genuine fear. "What's going on?" Spencer demanded. "Gas leak in the kitchen," I said, breathing hard. "The alarm woke me up. We have to get out now, before the house explodes." I started urging them toward the front door, but Spencer suddenly stopped mid-stride. "Wait," he said, his expression shifting. "How did you know it was in the kitchen?" "The alarm panel shows which sensor was triggered," I lied smoothly. "Please, we need to leave now." But Spencer didn't move. Instead, he stared at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Sharp, suspicious, predatory. "Emily," he said quietly, eyes still locked on mine. "Doesn't this all seem a little convenient to you? A gas leak, the night before we're supposed to leave?" Emily looked between us, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" "I'm saying," Spencer replied, "that maybe our housekeeper knows more than she's letting on." The alarm wailed on, but he seemed completely oblivious to it now. All his focus was on me, and I saw the exact second when suspicion turned into certainty. "You know what I think?" he said, stepping closer. "I think you've been listening to conversations you shouldn't have. I think you know exactly who we are and what we're planning." "Mr. Hartwell, we really need to evacuate," I insisted, though even I could hear the strain in my voice. "No," Spencer said calmly, dangerously. "I think we need to talk first, about who you really are and what you think you're going to do with whatever you believe you know." The mask was gone. The charming, sophisticated architect had vanished, and in his place stood the cold-blooded killer I'd heard plotting my death. "Spencer, what are you doing?" Emily snapped. "The house could blow up." "The house isn't going to explode," he said flatly, "because there isn't a gas leak, is there?" He narrowed his eyes at me. "You must have tampered with the system and triggered a false alarm." He was wrong about the details, but right about my intent. And now I was standing in a hallway with two killers who knew I was a threat. "I think," Spencer went on, "it's time you told us who you really are, because I'm starting to doubt that Margaret Chen is your real name." This was it, the moment I had been working toward, the point where the entire plan would either come together or blow apart. I took a slow breath, straightened my back, and met Spencer's gaze head-on. "You're right," I said quietly. "Margaret Chen isn't my real name." A satisfied smile flickered across his face, then faltered as I continued. "My real name is Laureen Hartwell, and you're my husband." The only sound for a moment was the gas alarm, still screaming in the background. Spencer's face drained of color, flushed deep red, then went pale again. Emily gasped and stumbled back a step. "That's impossible," Spencer whispered. "Laureen is dead." "No," I said, letting all the fury and betrayal flood my voice. "Laureen was supposed to be dead, but your plan failed, Spencer. I'm very much alive, and I know everything." His hand twitched toward his pocket, and I realized he might be reaching for a weapon. Before he could move further, Emily grabbed his arm. "Spencer, the gas!" she hissed. "If she's telling the truth, then maybe she did trigger a leak. We need to get out of here." "She's lying," he snarled. "She's just some crazy woman who's been spying on us." "Really?" I said. "Then how do I know about Rebecca Martinez? About Diane Thornfield and Susan Walsh? About your flight to Mexico this morning? And the villa waiting in Costa Rica?" His face crumpled as the truth sank in. I knew every detail. "You've been busy," he said slowly. "But it doesn't matter. You're still going to die tonight. We'll just make it look like you tried to blackmail us and things went wrong." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "I'm not going to die tonight." "But your plan is?" I held up my phone. The screen lit. "Everything you've said for the last 10 minutes has been recorded and streamed directly to Detective Sarah Morrison of the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. She and her team are outside this house right now, waiting for my signal." Spencer lunged for the phone, but I was ready. I stepped back, and he crashed into the wall instead. "Sarah," I called out clearly toward the device, "now would be a good time." Within seconds, I heard car doors slamming outside, then heavy boots pounding up the front steps. "Monterey County Sheriff's Office! Open the door!" Spencer spun around, looking wild, cornered. Emily had sunk to the floor, her hands covering her face. "It's over," I told them, my voice calm for the first time in weeks. "All of it. Rebecca, Diane, Susan, they're all going to get justice now." The front door burst open, and Sarah Morrison strode into the hallway with 3 deputies at her back, guns drawn. "Spencer Hartwell, Amanda Kellerman," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "You're both under arrest. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud," Sarah said as the officers moved in and cuffed Spencer and Emily. Spencer shot me a look of pure hatred. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You have no idea what you've started. There are others involved, people who won't let you destroy everything we built." "Let them come," I replied, steady and calm. "I'm not afraid anymore." And for the first time in months, maybe in years, that was completely true. 6 months later, I stood in a courtroom while the judge read Spencer's sentence aloud. 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murders of Rebecca Martinez, Diane Thornfield, and Susan Walsh, plus another 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Emily, who had agreed to cooperate and testify against Spencer in exchange for a lighter sentence, was given 20 years. She'd be 62 by the time she got out, If she survived that long, prison does not treat women who prey on other women kindly. The families of Spencer's victims filled the benches. Rebecca's daughter, now 22, had driven down from Oregon. Diane's sister had flown in from New York. Susan's son had come from Denver, taking time off work to be there. Afterward, they came to thank me, tears in their eyes. My mom always said something about that car crash felt wrong, Rebecca's daughter told me. Thank you for proving she was right. I accepted their thanks, but I knew the truth. I hadn't started this to get justice for them. I had stumbled into their stories while fighting for my own life. Sometimes, though, justice shows up in the most unexpected ways. The trial became a media circus. Wife outsmarts husband's murder plot. Secret investigation foils serial killer spouse. Headlines like that ran on every major news outlet. I turned down the interviews and book deals. I didn't want fame. I wanted privacy, peace, and the chance to rebuild a life that was truly mine. The beach house was sold within a month of Spencer's arrest. I couldn't stand being there anymore. Every room was haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. Memories of overhearing my own planned murder, of serving dinner to two people who were counting down the days until I died. Instead, I bought a small cottage in Mendocino, overlooking the ocean but far from the place where my world had almost ended. It was much simpler than the beach house. No grand statement pieces, no attempt to impress anyone. Just a quiet, honest place where I could exist without Spencer's shadow hanging over me. I also changed my name legally, not to something entirely new, but to Lorene Margaret Hartwell, blending my real identity with the one I'd lived under as the housekeeper. Margaret Chen had been braver than the old Lorene ever was. She had taken risks, pushed back, refused to die quietly. I wanted to carry that strength forward. My interior design business took a hit at first. Some clients didn't want their names anywhere near a high-profile murder case, no matter how innocent I was, but others felt drawn to my story, a woman who refused to lie down and be destroyed. My client list changed, but it didn't shrink, it evolved. I began working with people who understood trauma, resilience, and starting over. At the moment Sarah called with new information, I was working on a project that mattered deeply to me, redesigning a women's shelter to make it feel comforting and safe instead of cold and institutional. "We found Marcus," Sarah said without any preamble when I picked up. "Spencer's fixer. The man who made boats disappear, bribed witnesses, wiped away inconvenient evidence. He was arrested in Tijuana trying to cross into Guatemala," she continued. "He's talking, giving us names, details, other jobs he did with Spencer. It looks like your husband was part of something much bigger than we realized." I wasn't shocked. Spencer had always been someone who thought 10 steps ahead. It made sense he'd build a whole network to support his schemes. "How many?" I asked quietly, not sure I wanted the answer. "At least 6 more women over the last 15 years, Sarah said. "Maybe more. Marcus kept everything. Notes, photos, details. Insurance for himself in case Spencer turned on him. 6 more women, 6 more families who had lost mothers, sisters, daughters to his greed. "Will you testify if we need you?" Sarah asked. "Of course," I said without hesitation, "whatever you need." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the sunset bleed gold and crimson into the ocean. I thought about those 6 women, about the lives they should have lived, the birthdays and milestones they never got to see. I thought about Rebecca and Diane and Susan, about how their stories had finally been pulled into the light. And I thought about the woman I'd been before that day at the beach house, the wife who trusted blindly, who never questioned the late-night phone calls, the emergency trips, the subtle cutting away of her friendships and independence. That woman no longer existed. Spencer might not have managed to kill me physically, but he had killed that version of me. In her place was someone harder, yes, but also more awake. Someone who understood that survival sometimes meant lying, planning, and fighting back. Someone who now knew that love could be wielded as a weapon, that the people who vowed to protect you could be the very ones you needed protection from. The cottage around me felt warm and safe in the fading light. I'd chosen every item with my own comfort in mind, not with impressing guests or appearing successful. The furniture didn't match perfectly, but it fit me. It felt like honesty. I had learned how to be alone without being lonely. Learned to trust my instincts instead of gaslighting myself. Learned that being cautious wasn't the same thing as being paranoid, and that setting boundaries didn't make me selfish. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. For an instant, my old fear flared. Spencer's associates? Someone trying to scare me into silence? But when I opened it, I saw it was from Rebecca Martinez's daughter. Hi, Mrs. Hartwell. We're planning a memorial service for my mom next month, to celebrate her life instead of just mourning her death. I was wondering if you'd like to come. She would have wanted to thank you herself. I stared at the message as my eyes filled with tears. In fighting to save myself, I had accidentally given those families something priceless: the truth. Someone to blame. Someone to watch being held accountable for what happened to their loved ones. More than that, I had validated their instincts. Rebecca's daughter had always suspected something was off about the accident. Diane's sister had never believed her sister would go sailing alone in a storm. Susan's son had wondered for years why a fire started in a room his mother barely used. They had all been dismissed, told they were paranoid, that they were clinging to conspiracy theories because it hurt too much to accept that random tragedy happens. Now they knew they'd been right to question, right to dig, right to refuse to just move on. I typed back, I would be honored to attend. That night, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had left San Francisco for a surprise visit to her beach house. Yes, I looked older, but there was a new sharpness to my features, a quiet strength in my expression. The softness that had once been mistaken for passivity had been replaced by something steadier, more determined. I looked like a woman who had walked through hell and made it out. A woman Spencer Hartwell would never be able to charm, manipulate, or control again. A woman who would no longer confuse isolation with love, control with protection, or manipulation with care. I looked like myself, fully, finally, myself. Through the open window, I could hear the sound of waves rolling steadily against the shore, endless, soothing, unthreatening now. The same ocean that once formed the backdrop to my planned murder was now the soundtrack to my freedom. Spencer was in prison, where he would die. Emily was serving time for the part she played in the deaths of innocent women. Marcus and the rest of their network were being hunted down one by one, and I was home, living in a space that belonged only to me, free from the constant undercurrent of fear I hadn't even recognized until it was gone. Tomorrow I would keep building this new life, taking on work that mattered, surrounding myself with people who saw my worth, making choices based on my needs instead of someone else's demands. Tomorrow I'd continue being Lorene Margaret Hartwell, survivor, fighter, and woman who refused to let evil win. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, I would sleep in peace, safe, free, victorious. The game was over, and I was the one still standing. Now I'm curious about you, the one who stayed with me through this whole story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever been through something even remotely similar? Betrayal, manipulation, or a moment where you finally decided to fight back? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to read your experiences. And while you're here, I'm leaving 2 more stories on the end screen. Both are favorites on the channel, and I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.